Today is Sunday, and it's Chanukah. Chav Hey Kislev, the first day of Chanukah. And Mesama Veismin, that Chanukah is a Rosh Tevis. Ches Neides, V'Alacha Kebeis Hillel. That's how you say. Chanukah is 5 letters. Ches Nun Vav Hey Beis. Ches Neides, V'Alacha Kebeis Hillel. And we pass it like Beis Hillel, which means that we're Meisav Heilich. We keep adding and we keep adding and we keep adding and we keep adding. Why? Because Beis Hillel believe in Leha Medrish Ikir Ela HaMaiseh. You can only count something when it exists actually. You don't celebrate potentials, you celebrate actions. Right? That's the machlekes of Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says, K'nei Yom HaNechnosim, and Beis Hillel says, K'nei Yom HaYetzim. Taste Hazeh. What's the difference, if you think about it, between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Beis Shammai says you look at potential. Why are you looking at potential? You're looking at potential is because the potentia is always going to be more than its own actualization. Right? There's a moed in the kederev. Yeah. It says, Ein vayehi el lashon tzara. Ein v'haya el lashon zimcha. Right? What's v'haya? It will be. What's vayehi? It was. So the Gemara says, vayehi, anytime it says it was, it's a lashon tzara. Anytime it says v'haya, it's a lashon zimcha. Why? Because potential is infinite. Potential means that there can be infinite possibilities. Actualization is always a limitation. Always a limitation. So in the best case scenario, whatever it is. So Beis Shammai says, don't look at what is, look at what's going to be. Because what is what is. What's going to be has infinite possibilities. And still says, no. Not in Olam Hazeh. After Mashiach comes. Now, look at what is. The only thing that matters is what is. You understand? Ches Neides V'Alacha Kebeis Hillel. You have one day of Chanukah, you light one candle. You have 2 nights of Chanukah, light 2 candles. But it's only one light. It's only 2 light. As opposed to the potential is infinite. And the teretz is, in this world, that's the only thing that matters. The only thing that's real is what you have. And the Rabbi used to bring that Achan Shal Pesach, you don't say Shechayonu. Achan Shal Pesach, you don't say Shechayonu. So up in Nigla, the simple reasons. But Rabbi Chizis is a story with the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Rashab and then the Rebbe Tzachayim Mushke. That Achan Shal Pesach is for Mashiach. You can't say Shechayonu unless something is actual. So Mashiach comes, we'll have to figure out a way of saying Shechayonu Achan Shal Pesach. But as it's now standing, you can't say Shechayonu Achan Shal Pesach because it's yet to be. It's a potential. Now, potential may be more important than actual, but we live in a world of action. We live in a world of actualization. The only thing that matters is Ma'aseh B'Poel. And there's a Chassidus behind this as well. The action may be limited, the actualization may be limited, but the fact that you did it in Olam Hazeh is infinite. Right? That's the Pnimius. If you want to think about what Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing about, Beis Shammai is saying something much more meaningful. Beis Shammai is saying is look at a situation for its promise, for its possibilities. And the promise is infinite. Beis Hillel says, no, not in Olam Hazeh. You look at what you have. What you have is real. What you could have is very nice, very theoretical. After Mashiach comes, we'll pass it like Beis Shammai. Why? Because after Mashiach comes, what's potential is going to be actual. Before Mashiach comes, the only thing that's actual is actual. And that's why Allah is like Beis Hillel, that you only count the days that you've actually passed, and you've lit the menorah, and so on and so forth. And of course, the other point is, Ma'ilin B'Kedesh V'lei Meridin, right? This reason of Beis Hillel is Ma'ilin B'Kedesh V'lei Meridin. You want to go in a direction of ascent. In Holiness, you want to rise. And Beis Shammai compares it to the Parei HaChag. To the Parei HaChag. No means Parei HaChag. To the Karbonos that they brought on Sukkot that represented the nations of the world that went from more to less. It's 13 cows on the first day, 12 cows on the second day, 11 cows on the third day, and there was a total of 70 cows over the course of 7 days, which correspond to the 70 nations of the world. Right? So if you think about it on a deeper level, what's Beis Shammai still arguing about? It comes back to Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot. Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot are connected or separate? If you connect Shmini Atzeres to Sukkot, that means you connect Shmini Atzeres to Goyim. Because the Sukkot, Haluas Havaya called Goyim, Shabchu Kalum, goes on Sukkot, that the Higover Aleinu Chaste, the Panos of a Goy, comes from the overflow to the Jewish people. This is connected to Sukkot. That's why in Sukkot you have Karbonos that correspond to all the nations of the world. Shmini Atzeres is connected to Sukkot and not connected to Sukkot. If Shmini Atzeres is connected to Sukkot, so even though Shmini Atzeres is Pareh Echad, Ayel Echad, L'chol Avad, Chavel Zal Mitcha, has a connection to Sukkot. If Shmini Atzeres has nothing to do with Sukkot, so then it has nothing to do with Goyim. Right? Chanukah is like Shmini Atzeres. The Rebbe once said a maimer on Zeiz Chanukah b'Yom Hashmini. You know that the Rebbe said a maimer once Chanukah b'Yom Hashmini Atzeres. Is Chanukah connected to Sukkot? It's not connected to Sukkot. If you go like Beis Shammai, indirectly, as many times as you want to say in, but indirectly there's a connection between Chanukah and Sukkot. Thank you, man. And the Aluas Vaikol Goyim and the Shiv Mumis. And Beis Hillel says, no. This is only for the Jewish people. Ma'ila B'Kedesh V'lei Meriden. You have to ascend in holiness, not descend in holiness. This is unique to Yidden. Chanukah is a story which Goyim have no shaykhis to. Just like Shmini Atzeres. Goyim have no shaykhis to. The whole 8 days of Chanukah, a Goy has no shaykhis to. So there you have some thoughts. Let's go to the Tanya. So here we are. I am right. What happened was last week, I read until the 2 dots on page Dalet, right? The two Umisha Daite Ktsara, which is 5 lines or 7 lines. I don't have a regular Tanya with me before the end of the paragraph on that page. But I'm going to go back and reread a little bit of what we read last time. And I actually advertised. I told you then that would we be doing this. So it shouldn't be a surprise to you. So we're going to start on page Dalet, the line that begins with the words Ve'echad. It's mamish the middle of that paragraph. The line that begins with the word Ve'echad, it says V'gam Hashikcha Mitzuya Al Kein Roshamti. We read these next 4 lines 2 weeks ago Sunday when we met last on Sunday for Tanya. But I'm going to read them again. Okay? The question was that people objected to the writing of a sefer as opposed to Yechidus. Yechidus is very personal, very intimate, very direct. A sefer is far more indirect, far more obscure. He says, first of all, not everybody can read straight. Second of all, not everything you write is written for everybody. And third of all, even if what's written is written for everybody, how do I know which part of it was written for me? And the answer to all 3 questions was B'yeda yom akirei ka'amina. I know you. And the way I explained it to you 2 weeks ago, this is a Rebbe talking. And when a Rebbe speaks, there's maximum objectivity. Nobody can interact with somebody else on a spiritual level, on a pneumistic level, without being subjective. Without himself or herself being part of the engagement, of the endeavor. A Rebbe can. And the Alter Rebbe says, my awareness of you is coming from that measure of objectivity, and therefore I wrote it in a way that you could read it. I wrote it in a way that you have a place in it, and I wrote it in a way that you'll find your place in it. But there's more. You'll see soon. The Alter Rebbe is going to introduce a very basic part of Hasidus Chabad, which is the din of Asei L'cha Rav, the din of a Mashpia. Alter Rebbe introduces it here. He says the Tanya doesn't work without a Mashpia. So I just want to share Derech Agav. Yesterday was Shabbos, and like everybody else, we celebrated Shabbos. We had some guests, and I got regards from a mechutin of mine. If I bring someplace, Yitas Kislev. And he said a very geschmack of art, and I questioned it, so I sent him to Shabbos on Nitel Vayolenu WhatsApp, and he answered me, and I looked it up, so I was able to clarify. The person who quoted him misquoted him, and the difference between what he said and how he was quoted was so disparate that it was not. I got upset almost. Not almost. Doesn't take much to get me upset. But anyway, the quote is that when the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, the Hasidim came to the Alter Rebbe and they said it's not working for us. It's arbeit nicht. So the Alter Rebbe answered, a halbe Sach arbeit nicht. Man darf zu dem haben the Inyan HaNegina. A half a thing will not work. The Tanya alone is not going to work. You have to add to the Tanya the Inyan of Negina, of singing. And the Alter Rebbe then instituted by Chsidim the Inyan Negina. This is the word. The way it was repeated to me was quite different, but this is the correct. I looked it up inside. A halbe Sach nempenes. You can't take it half. The only way to take it completely is that along with the Tanya, you should sing. And Alter Rebbe then instituted Chsidim Negina. And the beginning of that sicha is the Tzemach Tzedek as a child was extraordinarily gifted in music. Incredibly talented in Nagina. Very, very talented. And he felt that it would interfere, as a very young boy, it would interfere with his Aveda, and he tried to suppress it. When the Alter Rebbe spoke this word, and the Tzemach Tzedek was all the 8 or 9, that the Tanya is not going to work without Nagina, so that Tzemach Tzedek had to reinvent a gift, a talent that he had tried to suppress for so long, because he felt it would disturb his Avedis Hashem and bring it back, because Alter Rebbe said that you have to sing Nigin, you have to have a singing. So that's another aspect. I'm just mentioning it because the point came up my Shabbos table yesterday. It's part of how the design of the Tanya was written. In other words, we're in the middle of the answer. We're in the middle of the answer. The questions were, how am I going to learn the Tanya and how would replace Yechidus? And the answer is, I know you. As the Rebbe knows, I know you. And I know you in the kind of way that I'm going to make sure the message that you need to hear from me will reach you. Okay? But of course there's other aspects which we're going to see soon. So okay, therefore, you have the place, okay, therefore. Rashamti, I wrote down, Kol HaTshuvas, Kol HaShelos. All the answers to all the questions. Now that phrase alone, Kol HaShelos, Kol HaTshuvas is overwhelming. Right? I remember that when we started learning Rambam, it was 1984, Tofshin Memdalad after Pesach. The first Shir in Rambam was Sunday. We started learning Rambam Sunday, Chov Zayin Nissen. We started learning Rambam. So I forgot whether it was for bringing before or for bringing after. But if I'm not wrong, the very first Sicha of the Rebbe on the Rambam is in the very first line in the whole Sefer of Rambam. The Rambam has an introduction. The introduction has a pasuk that says, Oz loy eivish ba'abiti al kol mitzvesach. It's in Kapitel Kuf Yates. Oz, then, loy eivish, will not be ashamed, ba'abiti, when I will stare up and I will see, it's called al kol mitzvesach, all of your mitzvahs. And the Rambam's first, every Sefer the Rambam begins with at least a pasuk. Sometimes 2 psukim, sometimes 3 psukim, but he always starts with a pasuk. And of course he also starts in the Minig Asfadim, like we write Beis Hamagdal, the Beis Hey, the Rambam writes B'Shem Hashem Kei Leilam in all of his Sfarim. B'Shem Adonai Yei Leilam. That's why he begins each one of his Sfarim. And he brings this pasuk, Oz le'evish ba'abiti al kol mitzveisecha. So the first Sicha, I remember I was a Bacharol, and we were all into it. You know, we all thought we can learn the Rambam, we can know the whole Rambam, until we actually learned it and discovered, not so easy to know this whole Sefer. Yeah. The Rambam sat down, and he said to himself, I know the whole Torah. It's pretty scary for a person to say, I know the whole Torah. How do you know? How can you know the whole Torah? Of course, he's talking about the dimension of halacha, which is finite. The deeper dimension of infinite. So the Rambam wrote, Oz le'evish, what should I be ashamed? Ba'abiti al kol mitzvesach. When you know the whole Torah, and you can be on balabayas of the Torah, and write the Torah, and Davas Hashem Zach. There's nothing to be ashamed. That's how the Rebbe touched it. So the Alter Rebbe writes, Kol HaTshuvas or Kol HaShal. This is every answer. You have a question, I know it, and I recorded the answer in the book. This is Moiden de Geverted. Alter Rebbe should write, there is no unanswered questions when it comes to matters of Vedas Hashem that are left unaddressed in the Sefer Tanya Kaddish. Lemishmeres, to be preserved, la'ois, as an indication. Now of course, to use a little Hasidus here, the word lemishmeres means to preserve. Simply speaking, lemishmeres means to be preserved for practical use. Right? Why do you have lemishmeres? Why do you save something? Where do you have in the Chumash the word lemishmeres? By the Paraduma, lemishmeres. By the Mate Aren, lemishmeres. By the Tzinsenes Haman, lemishmeres. That's the word lemishmeres is used. In some cases, lemishmeres means you're putting it away to use it. But in other cases, lemishmeres means you're putting it away to have it. Even if you don't use it, you have to have it lemishmeres. You have to preserve certain things. So all of these eitzes, all of these shilas, the girls always ask me in the seminary, why are we learning those prakim in Tanya where the Rebbe says we shouldn't do what the Alter Rebbe says? And the teretz is lemishmeres. You have to learn the Tanya, lemishmeres. You have to remember it. And in addition, it teaches us the practically, as an indicator, leyes lekol echad v'echad, that should be available to each one. Lezikarin beineinu, somebody can remember and have it between his eyes, meaning to say, not just you can read the Sefer and know what you need to do. You can remember the Sefer, you can internalize the Sefer, you can make the Sefer yours, so you'll always have in front of your eyes the eitzes that the Alter Rebbe provides. And the Alter Rebbe says, and he will cease to insist, the kones, to enter in the daber imi b'yechidus, to speak to me in private. Ki bohen, in the Sefer Tanya Kaddish, in this Sefer, yimtza margeya lenafshi, one can find margoya, that means calm, that means peace, that means a pleasant moment for his soul. Ve'etz ha-nechayna, and counsel which is nechayna. Literally nechayna means correct. More precisely, nechayna means already been cooked, prepared, right? Somebody prepared it before, and all you need to do, it's cooked food, you have to just chew it. For whatever may be difficult for a person in serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Alter Rebbe concludes, again, all of this we read 2 weeks ago, and of course, b'chalal in life, and also, and perhaps particularly, when it comes to Yonam Avodas Hashem, we all need Siyata D'Shmaya. Right? Your heart should trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we'll use the Tanya, and we'll use the Tanya the way we're supposed to, and it'll give us the counsel that we need to be able to serve the Eibishter. And in addition, we will lean on the Eibishter, who is Geim Ba'adeinu. Geim Ba'adeinu means everything we do, He has to do with us anyway. Right? The Gemara says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezrei, if Hashem didn't help us, we would never be able to overcome the Yetzer Hara. So all of these endeavors of serving the Eibishter that's being prescribed here by the Alter Rebbe are based on the presumption that the Eibishter is going to help us. Siyata D'Shmaya. At the reality, the Eibishter is going to help us. The Eibishter is going to help us. We'll certainly succeed. So this is the Sefer Tanya Kaddish. Now I wanted to reread these words. I read these words last week, or 2 weeks ago. I wanted to reread these words. It was very important to me to give it a little bit more time. We already discussed the terminology Hanestaris. But Yiddishkeit is divided into two parts. Haniglis and Hanestaris. Right? Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai is Hanestaris in the language of Chanukah. And Beis Hillel is Haniglis. And the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Not like Beis Shammai. What's Haniglis? Haniglis means what you do. Everybody does mitzvahs the same. Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillin don't have and are not allowed to have an extra letter. If they have an extra letter, they're puzzle. Simple. Moreover, even the Torah of Haniglis, the Torah that we learn, which is Leidas Amaisa Shayasa, Ve'ela Shaleisha Sen, the Torah which teaches us how to live our lives, practically is everybody the same. The Shulchan Aruch is the same. The Torah is the same. The Chochmah, the Torah, intellectually, that's part of Hanestaris, and there's many, many different paths to that. And I might as well advertise now. In the next hour, we're going to be learning a Maimed, where the Alter Rebbe, our Rebbe, is officially talking about Haniglis Hanestaris. He gives exactly one line for Hanestaris, and the whole Maimed is Haniglis. Because he wants to talk about the idea of Yerida Teireh Chaliyah. The Torah that we have is called Haniglis. It was given to us in such a way that everybody is the same. What's Hanestaris? The secret Torah, the mysterious Torah. So B'Pashas Hanestaris means Sfeid, Kabbalah. But the Alter Rebbe translates Hanestaris, the personal Torah. The Torah that has to do with your relationship with the Eibishter. That's Hanestaris. In other words, you learn Chassidus. Everyone's learning the same Sfarim. But Chassidus is about your personal relationship with the Eibishter. A personal relationship with the Eibishter, Kishmoi, Kain, who is personal. You know, we live in the modern world. Anybody who's involved in Shlichus or speaks to people knows that people consider religion very personal. No two people. I remember I once sat in American Shlichus with a Reformed couple, and they were discussing interpretations. Torah could be interpreted like this, and Torah could be interpreted. Everybody is entitled to their interpretation. And we argued, futilely, but we argued. I, of course, disagreed with them. And the reason why it's this way is quite obvious. If you make up your own religion, then you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping the God of your creation. You have to follow the Eibishter's Ratzon. But there is also a personal element. The whole point of Torah and Mitzvahs is it's not all personal. There is a personal dimension which has to do with your mind and your heart and your senses and your soul and your time in life and your place in life and your circumstance in life and your so on and so forth. Right? The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Hakel lefi mashahu adam. V'hakel lefi azman v'hamokim. It's a word straight out of the Tanya. It depends on what kind of mensch you are. It depends on the time and it depends on the place. That's called Hanestaris. No two people are alike. So the Haniglis are constant. The Hanestaris are as varied, are as flexible, as plastic, as adaptable as there are people and circumstances. Tanya is a sefer of Hanestaris. Tanya is not a book of law. Tanya is a book that talks to the heart, it talks to the soul. It talks about, I want a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or to add a very important word in American, I want a personal relationship with God. I want a personal God. Elekeinu, mein Gott, unser Gott, Elekai. And the Tanya talks to that. So the Alter Rebbe is talking about people who wanted to be a Hasidim. That means Alter Rebbe is talking to people who wanted a personal relationship with the Eibishter. In other words, this is not only a book that teaches you how to fight with the Yetzer Hara, to become a Beinani. This is a sefer that teaches you how to approach Elokus. Fighting with the Yetzer Hara is a significant step in having a relationship with Eibishter. Or the fight with the Yetzer Hara itself, on a pnimius level, on a Hanestaris level, is already a relationship with Eibishter. Because in order to fight with the Yetzer Hara, you need a certain energy. That energy is you. That energy is Hanestaris. And this is the sefer that the Alter Rebbe wrote. So the Alter Rebbe is dealing with people who want a relationship with the Eibishter, and it's hard. Why? Because Elam Hazeh and the relationship with the Eibishter are not exactly compatible. So the Sefer Tanya Kadisha is dealing with the challenges that arise from the interface, from the crossing of joints, the crossing of paths between having a relationship with the Eibishter and the struggles of Elam Hazeh. So the Alter Rebbe says, I'm going to teach you both. And I'm going to teach you both practically and comprehensively. I'm going to teach you how to deal with the challenges that Elam Hazeh brings to a person's way. And I'm going to teach you how to, in spite of those challenges, develop a relationship with the Eibishter. And of course, the Nekuda HaTichoina, the pnimius of it all is, if you have to say what the Tanya is, and I said this a few weeks ago in my introductory classes, there are few Sfarim in the universe that say emes like the Tanya does. The Tanya is a sefer of incredible emes. That's what's so special about the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. It speaks an emes to each person, which is absolutely undeniable. It speaks an absolute emes. There's the word that I told you the other day, that a guy said, the Tanya tarabgunum dem narfam. What the Tanya does says emes. What's the emes? It's the emes of the person and the emes of the world. In other words, avodas Hashem. If you're talking about Hanustanis, if you're talking about what we call in our culture the personal relationship between a person and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, honesty is everything. You have to know what you're capable of, you have to know what you're not capable of, but what you're capable of you have to be able to do. The Alter Rebbe provides an emes which tells a person where he's holding, an emes which is telling a person where the world is holding, an emes which tells the person the interface between himself and the world at every moment, such well to serve Hashem completely. In other words, whatever you're able to do, you must do, and what you can't do, you shouldn't expect yourself. This is the kind of sefer that the Alter Rebbe wrote. And that's the taich. Kol ha-tshuvis al kol ha-shaylas. You have a question, I have an answer. The answer is going to involve Yiddishkeit, the Eibishter, you, and your world. And this is where the emes lies. And I just want to mention to you as a conclusion for this thought, a very geschmack about there was a Yid whose name was Reb Shimon Lezachaver. This Yid was a Goan Adir. They used to say that he has the best memory of his generation. I don't know how anybody could be called the best memory of generation and be a contemporary of the Rogatchover Goan, but he had a Zikar Niflat, Alskevust, incredible memory. He was for a while Mashgiach or Aram et Mechtimim Vasher. Later on, he was the Mashgiach in Chachmei Lublin, in the Meir Shapiro's special yeshiva. He was the Mashgiach. He had an incredible memory. He was a Chassidish Shehid, not a Lubavitcher, but he had very strong. He knew everything, so he knew Chabad also. So he wanted that the Bochum in Chachmei Lublin should learn Tanya about that. And they were not. Chachmei Lublin was a Chassidish yeshiva, but it was not a Lubavitcher yeshiva. It was a Chassidish yeshiva. Chassidish Bochum learned Chachmei Lublin, but it wasn't a Chassidish yeshiva. It was a yeshiva that the entry was like 300 block Yamada by heart. To get into Chachmei Lublin was a very, very high level of learning in the Derech Chassidic Poem. And he was the Mashgiach, and he wanted the Bacham to learn Tanya by heart. So the Bacham didn't want. So they said to him, you know Tanya by heart? He says, absolutely. Can we test you? He said, yeah. So they would read a word or two, he'd tell him where it was. And finally one of the Bacham opened the Tanya and he read words, Va'al Yehi Sheite, which means don't be a fool. It's in Perek Chavches. It's in chapter 28. Bacham said to this, Rav Shimon Zalachaver, Vu steht in Tanya, Va'al Yehi Sheite. So he said, in Yeder Vati. It's in Perek Chavches, chapter 28. He said, Vu steht in Tanya, don't be a fool. So he answered in every single word. This is what the Tanya did. Tanya provided. Anyway, so Alter Rebbe wrote a sefer. And if you have to put it in practical words, these are the practical words. The Alter Rebbe never offered to make life easy for us. He offered to teach us how we could live it practically, but never said it's going to be a walk in the park. You know, in the Pasuk, it doesn't say, Ki kal meyoid hadavar, Ki kal hadavar meyoid befich u'vav chalasei. It says Ki karev. There's a very big difference between the word kal and the word karev. Kal means easy. Karev means near. Near means possible. There is one place in Tanya where the Alter Rebbe actually uses the word kal. In chapter 17, in one place, the Alter Rebbe actually uses the word cow. But Azoi, the Alter Rebbe does not use the word cow, the Alter Rebbe used the word kodesh. The Alter Rebbe never offered to provide us a quick and easy solution to life. As we know, and we're going to be talking about the Mitzvah Hashem, and we're going to do the Hakdama, the Shadletel, but the Alter Rebbe is not giving us a walk in the park. But on the other hand, the Alter Rebbe is saying, there's the famous Loshen, which is brought in the Sichas of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov had gewissen as jeder eine darf dienen dem Eibishter. The Baal Shem Tov showed that everybody must serve Hashem. We need to say everybody can serve Hashem on a level of Anastaris. Of course, every Yid has to keep Torah mitzvahs. The Baal Shem Tov said every Yid can have, again, to use the American cliche, a personal relationship with the Eibishter. The Alter Rebbe be'avizin v'yazoi. And the Alter Rebbe showed how it's possible. And that's what the Tanya is. The Tanya is not easy. And the Alter Rebbe's Chasidim's issue with the Tanya was not because they wanted easy. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim didn't have the word easy in their vocabulary. The Alter Rebbe wanted it because they felt that they can't get it. And the Alter Rebbe said, no, you can get it. Okay? Because this is a Kol HaTshuvas, Al Kol HaShailis, written by Yedei Omakir. And then the Alter Rebbe adds the final point. Umi, and if there is somebody that in spite of the amount of attention and preciseness that the Alter Rebbe invested in the Tanya, that Shaddai take tzara, his understanding is still deficient. Lahovin dvar eitza, to understand a matter of counsel in serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, miteich kuntreisim elu, by reading these pamphlets. Says the Alter Rebbe, Yefaresh tichosei lefnei agdelim shebeirei. Alter Rebbe establishes the concept of interconnectedness, of mashpiyim, of asei lecha rav. Consult the Chassidim in your city who are gdelim. What's that gdelim? Big. Gdelim could also mean older, wiser. Chassidim who have greater wisdom than you, go and consult them. And you should see the films. We have films of Chassidim Verbringing. You have films of the Mendel Futterfas Verbringing. And what does the Mendel talk about in his Verbringings? Often, durchreden sich. He says, the Platten einem treten den Kopf, aber zu reden sich. He says, young alike have to talk. People have to share with one another. In Yorim, for Pnimiyas Bechlal, in life, it's very, very important not to be alone, to consult. Durchreden sich. And by Hasidim, this was a Yesod. And it's a source of it was the Tanya. Have someone to talk to. And at the very least, have a mashpiyah. So in other words, it's the best way to do it is Knei Lecha, right? You know this. When it comes to having an Avat, it's Asei Lecha. Force yourself to take a teacher. When it says to a Chavet, it's a Knei. If you have to pay for the teacher. For a friend, you have to even pay. For a teacher, you don't have to pay, but you have to squeeze yourself. For a good friend, you have to prepare even to pay. To have somebody to talk to. And here the Alter Rebbe introduces the idea, what we call today mashpiyah. Now, if you know the history of Chassidus, and the Frierdiker Rebbe, of course, tells this history so richly and so in such a living way. The Frierdiker Rebbe says so often, I'll tell you the Maise. The Maise is that the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, spent about 6 or 7 months in Vienna in the year 1902-1903, in Wien, which is in Austria, of course. At that time, it was before World War I yet, there was already then a very substantial community of Jewish people living in Vienna, including many Chassidissen. And there were Chassidische Stieblacht, various different Chassidissen, different Rebbes. And there was a certain Chassidus, I forgot the name of the Chassidus and the Pratim, it's not important. The bottom line is that there were a site that the Rebbe Rashab saw, a huge pot. It wasn't a pot, it was a barrel of water being carried by Yidden with white beards, with greatest slavos. They weren't just carrying it, they were energetically engaged in carrying this water like as if it was some treasure. All around them are Bacharim Lach. And they keep walking over to these elders and say, can I take it from you? And the elders say, no. Can I take it from you? And the elders say, no. Can I take it from you? Anyway, the Rebbe Rashab watches this scene, and he later asked a bunch of questions. When he found out, this was a Rebbe coming to him, of a certain Chassidus, and the quarter, that shtivel, had a well. It was water. But there was a rich chassid who said that he will pay for the entire expenditure of the Rebbe's visit to town if they'll take the water from his well. And he lived on the other side of town. So they went to the other side of town, they picked up this barrel, they filled it up with water, and they carried it across town. And the elder Chassidim are carrying it, and the younger Chassidim are trying to ask them for the schus that they should carry the water. So the Rebbe Rashab said, why don't the young carry it? He said, no. And he brought the word from the Chelik HaBeditchev Erov about sick malachim and healthy malachim. And we don't have gesund malachim, one healthy malachim. Healthy malachim, you have to have seasoned Chassidim. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was with the Rebbe Rashab when this all happened. And the Frierdiker Rebbe describes his father's impression. His father was very moved. He was very, very favorably impressed by this Chassidish, all these Chassidish Ergeshim, the Chassidish Pnimis, the Chassidish Bittel, the Chassidish Chayis, and the Tmimos, of course. He said, but this is not Chabad. Because in Chabad, the Lashon was the Eltere wollten gehat Mesiras Nefesh, he said. The senior Chassidim had Mesiras Nefesh and allowed the younger ones to carry the water, understanding that they're not going to carry it as well as they can, because of the Infachinach and Adrach. Because of the way the Chassidim were designed, they were created as a community, that there should be a relationship between the Eltere Chassidim and the younger Chassidim and the Infan Ashpor, and being makar of them. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, in the history of Chabad, there was an incredible Mesiras Nefesh from two ends. Eltere Chassidim felt very responsible for the younger Chassidim, that they have to bring them to the Oyer of Chassidus, and they would give all the time that they needed to help them come close to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the younger Chassidim had the Mesiras Nefesh to pay attention, to listen to every word and every thought that they heard from their senior Chassidim and absorb it. And this is what the Rebbe is describing in his generation, the Infan Arav, Infan Mashpia. So Alter Rebbe says, I wrote a Tanya, and it's Kol HaTshuvas and a Kol HaShailas, and anybody who wants to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu will learn the Sefer Tanya Kadisha, and will find a derech which will help him connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Sefer was written by somebody who was a Yedai or Makidai, and he says, but for it to work, right, just like I said to you before, you have to have Negina, you also have to have Aseh L'Charav, Vehem Yeveinenuhu, and they will help him understand it. And the Alter Rebbe concludes, Ve'eleihem Bakashosi, and to them is my request. Shalei losum yad lepen, not to put their hand over their mouths. Lehisnaheg ba'nova v'shiflus shal sheker chas v'shalom. To behave with a humility and a loneliness which is disingenuous. Don't get humble. When somebody needs a eitz and a drach and avodas Hashem, don't become bittel. If you have information, you want to share it, and you can share it with your fellow, you must share. Like the Rebbe said, if you know Aleph and someone else doesn't know an Aleph, you teach them an Aleph. And here we're talking on a much higher madrege. This is not a time and a place for bittul. A yid needs heiron adracha. Share it with him. Give it to him. I'm not going to say a name, but I'll tell you Avard. There's a yid I know, it was my father's generation, who told me Avard. It's a very interesting thing. He says he lived in a certain place. I'm not going to say where because I don't want to give away the name. And there was a chassid, a tomim. He says they sat with this guy Shabbos after Shabbos for years. He was Moliv Godesh. Everybody know he was packed with Chassidus. Never said a word. They would sit by the Kiddush, he would just sit there. And they would beg him, say something. He said, you needed a favor? A Gashmi is like a favor, a physical favor. He'd take his shirt off his back and give it to you. He told me a story how he needed a loan, and he borrowed money. This Elter Chassid borrowed money, so he should be able to have all what he needed. He says, but to squeeze a word of Chassidus out of him was like from a stone. It was just sealed. Susim, you know. No, I'm not. This was a unique personality who was known to be this kind of a mystery, of a secret. Now, the Rebbe says this is not appropriate. You have to open up your mouth and you have to say what you have to say. It is known the severe punishment of one who holds back from providing bar. Bar literally means panos, food. But in this case, it's a reference to ruchnis, the food. And the Gemara, I'm reading the quote here in the bottom, Kol Lamenei Allah Pia Talmud, Shenem Amenei Abad. It's a terrible thing to have an ability to help a yid come closer to the Eibishter, and because of sneas and shiflus, you don't want to do it. On the other hand, Vegedel Aschar, the terrible reward that one receives when he does a favor for a second person. Right, and in our generation, this is truer than it ever was. A chassid came into the middle of Rebbe, and he complained about his level of his avodas Hashem. He complained. I don't know what his complaints were, but he complained about his avodas Hashem. So the middle Rebbe told him, it's a very sharp lashon. He says, "Tu v'siich tu." He says, "Do as I do." As ich zeh, as ich gib sich mit sich allein kein Eitzen nit, gib sich auch mit das Weit. When I see that with myself, I'm not getting any place. instead of thinking about me and hitting my head against the wall, I start thinking about another person. And the Mittler Rebbe. So what does it mean the Mittler Rebbe gives him an Eitzah? What does it mean the Mittler Rebbe doesn't give himself an Eitzah? This is of course impossible to understand. But the Wort is a Richtige. And of course the Rebbe, our Rebbe, made from this a Yesod. In the very first Maimon Basilagan, the very first Maimon, there's an expression. Our Rebbe's Basilagan. It's based on the Maimon Chazal, Vayikra Sham B'Shem Hashem Eil Elam. Right, it's a pasuk in Bereshis. So on this it says in the Chazal, Al Tikra Vayikra Ela Vayakri. Vayikra Sham B'Shem Hashem Eil Elam means Avraham Avinu called the name of the Eibishter. Vayakri means other people call the name of the Eibishter. So the Chazal say, it wasn't that Avraham Avinu himself taught the world about the Eibishter, but he was a Tefach Hamanas Latfiach. He got other people to call the name of the Eibishter. So the Rebbe quoted this Maimon Chazal. And he said, Yedua as in Al-Tikri. We know in the Klolim of Al-Tikri, this rule of Torah, when you change a word from one form to another, that you have to read it both ways. And the Rebbe said these words, Oib du willst, as dir soll eingehen, der Vayikra, mu sein der Vayakri. Which means in plain words, if you want that you, the Chassid, should have a relationship with the Eibishter, you have to give someone else a relationship with the Eibishter. That's how the Rebbe put it. In other words, it's not only the pshat that it helps. This is in our generation, our closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu begins with being makad of somebody else. So the Alter Rebbe says, the great reward of assisting someone Azal, Mimaimer Azal, based on the Lashon HaGemara, Al Pasuk, on the Pasuk, Meir, Einei, Shneim, Avaya. The Eibishter will light up the eyes of both. That when one person assists the second person, not only does the second benefit, the first one benefits as well. The Eibishter will shine the light of his countenance upon them, which means literally the light of the face of the living God. So I want to pause over here and translate this. What's the title? It's a pasuk, I think, originally. It is. Pasuk in Mishlei. Ar Pnei Melachayim is used in a context. In other words, it's not necessarily the original context, but it's applied to that context. And the context is that every nation has a king. Every nation has a king. A king is the head of the government. Everybody understands that. A government is made up of many people. There's very few civilizations that are small enough where one person can govern everything. Right? A civilization has many, many officers. But there's one person that's the head of the government and he represents the government. So on a simple level, he's the senior officer, he's the senior governor of the community. But he also represents the nation. He represents all the people. So his face is the face of the country. So there's a concept of Oyer Pnei Melachayim. The king's face exudes light and life. Because beyond being a governor, beyond being an officer who oversees the practical governance of a community, because he represents the community, he represents goodness, which has many manifestations. And one of them is, if you have to do something not good, let somebody else do it. This isn't only cowardice. It isn't only, I want people to like me, so I'll get some other guy to do it. The king has to represent light, goodness, life. Another example for this, it's a law in many civilizations. If a person is on the way to the gallows, a person is about to be killed, and he comes across the king, he's free. A person is being executed for a crime committed, and he was tried, and he was found guilty, and so on and so forth. If he encounters the face of the king, he's free. It's like Oyer Pnei Melachayim. The face of the king exudes light and life, and brings into the situation an element which is transcendent. In other words, a person who's the head of a country not only is the head governor, but he represents the soul of that country, and the soul of everything is good. The technical components may have difficulties, may have challenges. The soul, the spirit, the neshama is lichtigkeit, oir, and chayim. So Pnei Melech, the face of the king, is lichtigkeit and lebendigkeit, is light and life. So the Alter Rebbe says that when the pasuk says Meir Einish Neim Avai, that the Eibishter will light up the eyes of both. That when one Yid helps another Yid in matters of Pnimius, there's a schar to the person seeking the help, but also very much a schar to the one providing the help, because the help comes from Pnei Melech Chayim. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means anything you do takes time and effort and thought and practice and so on and so forth. Anything you do, it takes a lot of work. But everything you do comes from what you are. What are you? A living person. Everything a Yid does is living according to what the Eibishter says he should live in the Torah. The source of all the various things that a Yid does, living as the Eibishter wants, is the Eibishter himself. So, when you're doing a mitzvah, you're following one law, you're following one aspect of the Torah. When you're involved in a certain pursuit, even if it's a Hanistaris, a previous Dika pursuit, it's one way of serving the Eibishter, it's one aspect of serving the Eibishter. But in the support that one person gives another person, you have Pnei Melech Chayim. In the support that one chassid gives another chassid, in the help that a mashpia provides for a mushpa, you have not one of the instructions written by the king, you have Pnei Melech, the king's face alone. The Eibishter himself exists in this kind of collaboration, in this kind of Avos Yisrael. And therefore, the Meir Eishneim, the benefit that comes to both, when one seeks the counsel of another, comes from the Oir and from the Chayim, the light and the life of the Pnei Melech. So seeking somebody else's counsel is a good idea, even if you don't need it. Because when you seek somebody else's help, that engagement reveals something which is bigger than the specifics of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It reveals Er Pnei Melech Chayim. And then the Alter Rebbe finishes, and he says these words, Umechaye Chayim, and the one who gives life to all living things. And of course, we want a relationship with him, and we want to serve him, and so on and so forth, as is the spirit of the Sefer Tanya. And the reason it's a struggle, and the reason we need books, and the reason we need Rabbeim, and the reason we need Mashpiyim, and the reason we have struggles, is because Elam Hazeh is Elam Ocheshech Kafel Chupel, right? And Friday we learned a Maimed. He says one level of Elam Hazeh is Helam Behester, it hides, it conceals. And another level of Hazeh is Menagit, he's an opponent, he's an enemy of Avedis Hashem. So the Rebbe concludes that the one who is the source of all life, Yizakenu v'Yechayenu, should give us the merit and give us the life to achieve liyamim, to those times ashalei yelamdu eid ishes v'gemen. People will no longer need to teach and to learn from one another. Kikulam yedu eid v'gemen, all going to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Mullah Ores, there said Hashem, the world will be filled with the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when everybody knows the Eibishter, and the whole world is filled with the knowledge of the Eibishter, you don't need somebody else to help you figure out how to have a relationship with the Eibishter. You naturally have a relationship with the Eibishter. And we could be ma'idech in this, but we're going to leave it alone. This Alter Rebbe finishes. Now the last paragraph, I'm going to leave it for next week. It's not much of a limud. It's going to take a few minutes. Next week we're going to really do the Hakdama, but I'm going to leave this for next week. Because the last paragraph is not an Indian. It's a technical thing. Or to say it in different words, in the Madura kind of Tanya, the Hakdama finished right here. The last paragraph did not exist, because the last paragraph is basically a copyright invocation.